I don't know if this is the right sub, but about a month ago I was camping in Mississippi with a friend we'll call Jack. We've both only been a handful of times, so I can say we are not the best campers. It was about 11:30 p.m., and we were in our tent about to go to sleep when I heard a rustling. We obviously didn't think much of it, because we were in the woods with animals. Not too long goes by, and we hear some more rustling and the sound of a blood-curdling scream. Jack was positive that it was a bobcat. Again, we weren't that worried, but I will admit I was a little afraid. We both fell asleep, but were woken up by the sound of scratching and another bobcat scream, this time closer. The scratching went on for at least 10 minutes, getting closer. We were both much more scared than we were before. Jack wanted to see what it was, and sometimes he acts on impulse. Before I could stop him, he quietly unzipped the tent just enough to where you can see out. He covered his mouth and moved away for me to see. It was very dark, but what I saw was a creature at least 8 feet tall with pale, very wrinkly skin, balloon-shaped head, and eyes that were so black they looked like holes. It had claws that it ran down the trees, causing the scratching sound. Its mouth was very thin and long. It never came closer than about 10 feet from us. It just walked and scratched until it made one last scream and turned to the trees. We left first thing in the morning. It was one of the most scariest things I have ever experienced, and I will never go camping again. Has anyone ever had an experience like this? What could it have been? Hi. I've posted my story on Reddit 8 years ago on an account that has since been deleted. I thought I'd post again. I like to see other people with similar experiences, especially in my area. I'm from Hazard, Kentucky, actually Perry County, but basically the same, which is a part of the Appalachian Mountains. My parents live very deep in the mountains, and I began seeing odd things in their house as early as 5 years old. My mom also grew up here and reports that odd, haunted type of things have always gone on at the house. I was never really allowed to watch horror movies about ghosts or shows like Ghost Hunters growing up because of the nature of the house. And I slept with my mom until I was around 13 because I was scared after seeing so many things at home. One night, however, we decided to watch the Ghost Adventure Waverly Hills episode. That night I woke around 3 a.m. to that feeling of something watching me. I could feel it as soon as I woke up. The feeling of evil and malice in the air. I rolled over and locked eyes with something standing beside my mom's side of the bed. Its skin was inhumanly pale, and this is coming from a redhead. It was slouched over and seemed as if it would never be able to straighten all the way up if it wanted. The skin looked as if bones were sticking out, and the fingers were extremely long and clawed. The face was sunken in and the eyes hollow. Black holes, seemingly. It appeared to have a few greasy-looking hairs on its head. Totally naked, but no genitals that I could see. I stupidly left my mom to fend for herself and covered myself totally up under the covers. I laid awake the whole night sweating bullets. My mom woke the next day and raised her shirt and asked what in the world had happened. She had claw marks down her side. They were so bad they were bloody, and the fingers looked as though they'd been stacked on top of each other almost. I wish we had a photo of this, but at the time this happened was probably around 2007, 2008. That would have placed me around 7 to 8 years old, but cameras weren't as around in your face as they are today, so we didn't think to take a picture. Prior to this, I had saw the creature once beforehand, but it didn't injure anyone. One night I woke and saw it on my side of the bed. I hid under the covers that night as well, but when I dared to peek out, it was still there hours later. This was before the first incident I described, and once again, it didn't hurt anyone the first time. It was gone the next morning when daylight hit and finally came out from under the cover. This story reads like a creepypasta, but it is very real. I never saw the creature again after the incident where it harmed my mom, but every time I drive down a dark back road, I think of it. I know I was not asleep imagining things when I saw this. I wanted to share my story to find more related ones close by. I've heard a lot of strange stories from people in my area, but none of this creature. It sounds stupid, but the best comparison for the appearance of this creature is the creepypasta for the rake. It looks almost identical. I would like to clarify, this did not impact me imagining this. I did not even have internet access until 2009, 2010, and didn't discover creepypasta until much later. Attaching images of what it looked most like. In the past, people called it a crawler, but I'm not sure what this would be considered. My Dogman encounter. Hello everyone. Hope everyone is having a great day or night. A few people have asked me to tell my story on here a few times, so here it goes. It's going to be a bit of a long one. This was about 23 years ago, and I had no clue what a Dogman was, and I didn't believe in anything supernatural back then. I was hunting wild hogs in one of the southernmost areas of the Great Dismal Swamp. This is far south of the wildlife refuge, where it ends at the Albemarle Sound in eastern North Carolina. I had put my boat in the water at a friend's house, about a half hour by water from where I went into the swamp. This was in late November, so it was pretty cold and really overcast, and it gets dark around 5 or so. It was about noon when I tied up and got out of the boat. First hour or so was pretty uneventful. I was working my way inland. Some of this part of the swamp can be walked through when the tide is low, and it's just marshy with deeper canals and bogs scattered about. But there aren't any trails or marked paths or anything, so you really have to pay attention where you're going and definitely need a compass since you can't see the sun. It's pretty dark in there, even on bright and sunny days. I was back in there about 2 hours and looking for signs of hogs. I could tell some had been back there at some point, but it had been a while. I got a little further in and started smelling what I had thought was a boar. It's rutting season, and male wild hogs have a very distinct smell. It's musky and kind of fermented smell mixed with old poop and urine. Kind of hard to explain if you've never smelled it before. However, this was different. It was musky, but more like an outside dog that's soaking wet. I stopped to look and listen, and after 10 or so minutes, I started hearing a snuffling breathing that came and went. After a bit, I started to hear some growling. I started to get a little freaked out because it didn't sound like a hog, and it sounded big. I stopped again and knelt down and waited and looked around. Where I was at the brush was pretty thick, so I really couldn't see more than 20 or so feet in any direction. That's when I started seeing movement. It definitely wasn't moving like a hog. It was kind of low, walking, crouched down, but not on all fours. And I was only getting glimpses of it, and it would stop. It was probably about 40 feet away. This is when I actually started getting scared. I was born in northeastern Kentucky and spent most of my free time as a kid in the woods, camping, riding dirt bikes, and have always been comfortable even in the deep woods. So, when I moved to North Carolina, I fell in love with the swamp. This is the first time I think I had ever felt real and actual fear. I had a Mossberg 590 shotgun full of 3-inch 00 buckshot, but no extra shells and no pistol. The 590 also has a bayonet lug, so I took out the bayonet and put it on. I started backing up, not taking my eyes off where I had last seen whatever it was. A few minutes later, I hear it again, a little further over to my left. I'm probably about 3/4 of a mile into the swamp wick. It doesn't seem very far, but the terrain doesn't make for really quick movement. This goes on for about another 20 minutes while backtracking out as fast as I can, and I'm still hearing it and catching glimpses of movement, and the smell is getting stronger. After a bit, I realize that this thing has gotten between me and the way I came in from my boat, and I'm starting to panic. I try to start getting further away from it and headed in the right direction, and then I see it again, and it's standing up, and it's pretty damn tall. It was still back in the brush, so I couldn't really make out any details as it's dark as hell back there. I wanted to cry and run, but I knew that was a bad idea. It didn't seem like it wanted to get in the water, so I started wading through the canal, heading back towards my boat. I started to put some distance between it and myself, so I got back on hard ground to move a little faster. But I can still hear it snuffling and growling and moving through the brush, but it's not close anymore. I made it back to my boat, and I'm soaking wet and freezing, but I thank God I made it out of there and just in time, as it's getting foggy and starting to drizzle. I had never been that scared in my life. I made it back to my buddy's house and tell him what happened, and I can tell he knows something when I tell him where I went. He brings me in and gives me some hot coffee with a big slug of bourbon in it. When I calm down, he takes me to the other house out back of his property to where his granddad lives. I'd met his granddad before, but he had always been kind of standoffish to me. I found out later he just had real bad PTSD from Korea, and he and his family had lived in that area since after the Civil War. I think his granddad's great-granddad had been a slave around there, but that's a story for another day. I guess what I mean to say is his family had history in that area and knew the place a lot better than me. After I told his granddad what happened, he stood up, looked me in the eye and said, "Don't go back in there. You're lucky you made it out. That's where the big dogs live." I left and went home and slept for about 18 hours. I tried to forget about that experience and started to believe I was just seeing shit and freaked myself out. I eventually forgot all about it, until a few years ago, when a Dogman encounters video came up in my YouTube feed. I was curious what the hell a Dogman was, So I started listening to it, and that whole experience came flooding back to mind. It was very similar to what happened to me. I started looking into it, and there have been other sightings and encounters in eastern North Carolina. So that's my story. I'm 44 now and still live in coastal NC, but haven't been back anywhere close to that area. I still hunt and love the outdoors and the swamp, but don't go too far in anymore.
This one's from my girlfriend.
When I was a child around the age of 6, perhaps younger, I used to visit my uncle's house on occasion with my mom and Nan. Each time I was there, I'd go to my uncle's bedroom to look at the mummy that laid on his bed. That's what I thought I was seeing, an adult woman that seemed to look like she was wrapped up in bandages or some material. My uncle was the kind that would tease you or wind you up, so I never believed it was real, just something he'd rigged to scare me. Each time I went to his house, I would drag my mom or my Nan into that room to show them, and frustratingly, each and every time they would claim not to be able to see a very obvious mummy laid out on the bed. It got to the point one day, after dragging my mom and Nan up to my uncle's room, and them not believing me, that after they left, I stayed to watch the mummy lay in the bed. I stayed in the doorway, the furthest I would ever go, with the side of the bed facing me, and glared as angrily as a little girl could at the woman in the bed. Then it sat up and turned to face me. I froze. It was when the thing started to get off the bed towards me that I discovered my legs again and ran. Years later, my Nan took me and a friend to my uncle's house to dog sit while he was away. It just so happened that his bedroom was where we would be having our sleepover. The room had been changed, and there was no mummy this time around. But retelling the story was enough to freak us both out for the night, though it didn't stop us sleeping. My mom and Nan can recall me asking about the bandaged women in the bed and other weird things I'd seen and experienced as a child. But no one else had experienced the mummy in that house. About 7 years ago, in Sierra Vista, a little city in Arizona about 15 minutes from the Mexican border, misfortune had hit hard. And I had been homeless for about 6 months at that point, so the usual schedule for me was to be awake until sunrise. The nights were cold, and staying moving kept me warm, and the first rays of sunlight were so warm that I was able to sleep. I would only sleep for a little bit before I was back up and hitting a local charity for lunch, catnap through dinner, wake back up as the sun goes down, and wander through the desert to stay warm until sunrise. I run you through my schedule so that you know this thing happened during my normal operating hours while I was fully awake. It's not possible that it was a dream, and not likely to be my imagination. So I had 2 routes. During the day, I would be in town, so I would be unarmed, but I had a straight-edge sword back in my burrow that I had bought when I had a job and a car and a house. During the night, I wandered the desert and would often be exploring far enough out that I could no longer even see the lights in town, so I would wear my sword sheathed on my back, a just-in-case measure. And I'd really only ever used it to carve up yucca stalks for the roof of my burrow. Okay, setup complete. Here's what I saw. I'm walking along, following the edge of a small wash, twirling a stick I found. I'd walked for about an hour to get there, so I was probably a good 5 or so miles from any human on the planet. I hear a thump-thump from up ahead, but there's some scruffy bushes ahead, so I can't see anything. Not wanting to sneak up on something dangerous like a mother wild boar or bear, I take my stick and smack the nearest tree a couple times. Thumping stops, and about 30 feet ahead of me, I see a head poke up from behind a bush. A head I've seen before, kinda. It had big eyes and tufty bits on it, and was basically set up like any other primate face. But it also looked almost reptilian. So I did what any normal person would do, and grabbed my sword handle and yanked it. Well, it doesn't really work like that. I yanked it forward and accidentally broke the strap that kept the sheath on my back. So here I am brandishing a sheathed sword at a lizard monkey, 5 miles from nowhere, and it stands up to a full height of 4 feet, and Usain bolts itself away from me with this ostrich person gait that was more awkward to watch than it was scary. I went back to my burrow. Salvation Army had fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and corn the next day.
Not my story, but my mom's.
When she and my aunt were young, they were playing with some neighborhood kids in the woods across the street from their house. She claims that they heard a noise from above them, looked up, and saw something crouching in the branches of the trees. She said it was humanoid, about 7-8 feet tall, and completely covered in fur. As soon as it noticed them, it leaped down from the tree and sprinted further into the woods. Of course, they were all terrified and ran back to the house. They never saw the thing again, but both my mom and aunt are adamant that it happened. I saw a humanoid something in the woods outside my childhood home. This was rural northern Wisconsin, and I was 14. Up until that day, I had zero fear of the woods. I spent most of my time out there exploring and feared nothing. My parents had a lousy marriage and fought a lot, and I felt more at home outside than in the house. On hot nights, I'd take a sleeping bag and sleep on the roof of an old shack on our property. I saw bears, I saw wolves. They were always more afraid of me than me them. I didn't believe in ghosts, Bigfoot, demons, or even God. I only got lost out there once, when dark fell sooner than I expected. I stayed calm, found the North Star, and knew that if I continued south, I'd eventually come across the old railroad tracks near my house. Even the thought of spending the night out there didn't bother me. The thought of my mom's rage when I didn't come home did. So, it was summer. I had just turned 14. My mom had left my father worked all the time, sister was living on her own. Once school is out, it was me and my cat, and this is before the internet or smartphones. We lived on a dead-end dirt road, and around noon, I took my usual stroll down the long driveway to check the mail. My cat followed me everywhere, and I actually kind of relied on him to give me a heads up if there was a bear or something close by. A bit of movement behind me as I stood at the mailbox made me aware there was something across the road in the trees, but there were pesky deer everywhere. I heard a loud crash, then like something very loudly making its way through the brush. It's like every goddamn classic horror story. My brain had no capability for the thought of anything paranormal or spooky. I simply tucked the mail under my arm and headed into the woods to investigate. My cat followed close behind. I got about 10 yards in when I noticed what I hadn't noticed before. There was no noise. Nothing. It was a beautiful June day, and there wasn't a single bird singing. No insects, no leaves rustling. It was absolutely silent. At the same time, I registered the silence. I got that eerie feeling that something was watching me. I stopped immediately and started scanning the woods for deer. Hunters know what I'm talking about when I say, you look for the shape of a deer instead of trying to pinpoint them by color. That's when I spotted it. 2 brown furry legs, the top of it concealed by tree branches. I went to sigh with relief when my cat hissed. I looked down and he was completely puffed out with his back arched. Looking at the same thing I was, I looked back up and the legs moved. Not like a deer, like a human. Everything happened at once after that. I dropped the mail, picked up my cat by the scruff, and ran for it. Whatever was out there with me was running after me. I have never run so fast in my life. I tore up the driveway, into the house, locked the door, and grabbed the phone.
I called my next-door neighbor, who was the ex-chief of police, and he came over immediately with his pistol. He checked out the spot I was in and found nothing. I was so hysterical I was in tears. He stayed with me until I was able to reach my mom and have her come get me. Of course, they thought I was completely high or delusional. I know exactly what I saw and felt. It was broad daylight. I never felt safe in those woods again and stopped sleeping outside. I should add that I thought I was looking at a deer's forelegs, but once it took a step, I realized the legs were far too thick and human, but with fur for that. And there were only 2 legs, not 4. Plus, I realized it was way too tall for a deer to be concealed by the tree branches. It all happened within seconds. I was, and still am, the calm, rational middle child, and my parents trusted me. They let me sleep outside. Sometimes we all did, to catch a meteor shower. I'd casually mention running into a wild animal, and my dad would just as casually say, "You made a lot of noise? Good." I was quiet and sensible and had never freaked out about anything before then. I had my neighbor's number for emergencies and had never called him prior to that. This is how shaken I was. I was embarrassed when he and my mom looked at me like a fool, and later, when my dad also didn't believe me. Not once did my instincts set me off in those woods until that very moment when I absolutely, beyond a doubt, realized I was prey and ran for my life. I used to live in Vancouver, Washington, on a cul-de-sac in Orchard Dell. It was a T-shaped cul-de-sac with another road going off of the side of the T. So I was heading to school at about 8 a.m. that morning. I only had to walk about a block from my house to where the cul-de-sac meets the main road. This was your typical everyday route that I took. However, that morning was different. When I got close to St. James, I looked up, and across the road was what I can only describe as a creature. It was made up entirely of black spheres in the shape of a man. It definitely had 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and a head, but again, all made up of black spheres, about a foot wide, a little bigger than a basketball. All of the spheres had a texture to them I had never seen before. That is creepy enough, but it was dancing around a pole across the street. This is a picture of the street and pole. The thing that's really hard to convey is that this thing projected nothing but pure malevolence. I felt that this thing was bad. Really, really bad. I would not say it was evil. It was just bad. It's like the difference between saying a man can be evil, but a man can also be good. This thing could not have the possibility of being good. There was no way. It was bad, through and through. Anyways, when I looked at it, it stopped dancing, looked at me, and just popped out of existence. It did not fade. It did not make any sound. It was just there one moment. The next moment, it was gone. I was very freaked out. But it's not like I was hurt or felt bad. I was just freaked out. Anyways, I just went to school like normal, if not a little shaken. Well, that night, there were some kids racing cars, drunk, and there were 4 or 5 people killed. The driver and all the passengers all died instantly. When I went out with my father to the corner where it happened, I was shocked because it was the exact same intersection where I saw that thing the previous morning. I cannot help but think I saw something strange that morning, something I was not supposed to see. Whatever that creature was, it was bad, bad news. I thought someone was flashing their brights at me for being rude. I didn't realize they were trying to warn me. 100% real encounter. Can anyone please confirm of any abnormal activity in or near Panther, PA? Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving through these empty, winding back roads in rural Pennsylvania on Route 447 near Stroudsburg. There was nothing but blackness for miles. No houses, no lights, just pitch dark countryside. The kind of dark that swallows your headlights. The only signs of life were the animals. Deer darting across the road, foxes skittering at the edges, and rabbits frozen in the beams. It felt like we were driving through nature's night shift. Because of the constant movement, I kept my high beams on and crawled along slowly to avoid hitting anything. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a car approaching from the opposite direction. As it got closer, it started flashing its high beams at us. I figured I was being that guy who forgot to turn his brights off, so I switched them off. But the driver kept flashing, over and over. At first, I was annoyed, like, "Alright, dude, chill, I got the message." I ignored it and kept driving. Then we came up to this bridge, old, narrow, and completely unlit. And that's when we saw it. Something was in the middle of the road. At first, it looked like an overturned trash can or some kind of debris. But as we got closer and I flicked the high beams back on, we realized it wasn't an object. It was a person, a woman. She was sitting crisscross dead center in the road, completely still. Her skin was ghost pale, sickly looking, almost like it was melting off her bones. Her mouth hung open, eyes black and glazed over, just staring. Blank. Empty. Behind her, off to the side, was a man, just as emaciated, just as pale, sitting on the guardrail and watching her silently. I slowed down instinctively. But as I saw the man, a wave of dread hit me. This is a setup. My brain went straight to survival mode. If I stop, he's going to pull a gun. They're going to rob us, or worse. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Are they trying to trap people? Is she bait? Are they trying to get hit? Are we about to get ambushed? I couldn't take the chance. I swerved, trying not to hit her, sped past them both, and the man on the guardrail shifted just enough to let us through. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove. But I cannot unsee her face. I've never seen a human being look like that in real life. Only in horror movies, and not even the basic slasher stuff. This was more like Exorcist or cannibal horror, completely surreal, totally out of place in the real world. Even now, I keep wondering, what were they doing there? Why was he watching her like that? Why didn't they move? What was that? I still don't know, but whatever it was, it didn't feel human. It's a long one, so bear with me. I've never typed it out before, only told it aloud. It's been many years, but the fear has stayed with me. When I was around 12 or so, my mom and I lived in an apartment in Texas. She was a single mom, so it was just her and I for many years. I was, and still am, very fortunate that she puts me first and did her best to make sure I had what I needed. Unfortunately, her work schedule didn't allow for her to be home when I got off of school, so I usually had to take care of myself in the afternoons until she got off. It wasn't too bad. Usually by the time I fixed myself a snack and got through my homework, she was home. I should note that at this time, I was still sleeping with my mom. I initially started out in my own room, but I began having these horrible nightmares. It was the same dream each time. I was sleeping in my room, and I could see a figure lurking in the hallway. I'd get up to turn on the light, and something would grab my hand, and I would instantly wake up. The touch of that hand was the coldest feeling I'd ever experienced. It was so vivid in my mind. I felt incredibly sad, almost like the happiness was draining out of me. I started making excuses about wanting to sleep with her. My mom never made a big fuss about it. We would stay up late reading on a regular basis, and I would accidentally fall asleep. I hated that room and avoided going in there at all costs. It got so bad that every morning before school, I would lay out a change of clothes in the living room so I could have them ready when I got home. My mom started to notice this routine and asked why I didn't just simply change in my room. I just made up some stupid excuse and she brushed it off. I kept my bedroom door shut at all times, and I would hurry past it if I needed to use the restroom. The dreams seemed to stay away once I stayed in my mom's room. It had been so long that I started to forget about them. One night, my mom had already fallen asleep, but I was still nose deep in my latest library book. It was late, definitely past midnight, when I got an eerie feeling. I couldn't place it, but I was instantly uncomfortable. I put my book down and noticed a lump under the covers, toward the end of the bed. We had a cat at the time, but I knew it wasn't her because she hated anything on top of her. I stared at the lump, and it started to move toward me. I froze. Every fiber in my body was screaming to move, but was paralyzed with fear. I finally mustered a weak, "Mom?" and nudged her, all while keeping an eye on the lump. Finally, my mom woke up, and as soon as she spoke, the covers went completely flat, like a balloon whose air had been released. I went into a crying fit and told my mom what happened. She assured me that I was reading too much scary stuff before bed and my eyes had played tricks on me. I convinced myself she was right and went to sleep. One weekend, I had a friend sleep over. My mom made a big deal about preparing my room for my friend and thought that maybe since I wouldn't be alone that it wouldn't be an issue. We did the whole typical sleepover shenanigans, played with each other's hair and gushed over our latest crush, all while listening to the newest NSYNC CD. I started to get anxiety as bedtime loomed closer. I somehow convinced my friend that it would be better if we made a bed on the floor in my mom's room because my room got hot or something like that. We quietly moved to my mom's room on the floor next to her bed and fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke instantly and sat straight up. I was staring at a lump at the foot of my mom's bed. I suddenly became overwhelmed with the urge to touch it. I lifted the sheet and placed my hand upon the smoothest object I'd ever touched. I instantly felt every happy memory being sucked away from my body. All thoughts, emotions, were drained. I felt cold, colder than any weather I'd been through. I became empty, like a shell of a person. Nothing was left but numb darkness. It was as if I was under a trance. I somehow was able to pull my hand away and I threw myself against the wall. I stared at the lump until I fell asleep. The next morning, I retold what happened to my mom, and she broke down in tears. She thought that this was all behind us, but clearly, it was more than she previously thought. I didn't do much that day. My mom busied herself with Sunday chores while I stared blankly at the TV. As she stepped out for a bit to do some laundry, she ran into our neighbor. Her name has left me, but I remember her being a caring figure in my life and a wonderful friend to my mother. My mom confided in her about all the odd occurrences, and her face went grim. Our neighbor was Native American and was super in tune with her culture and traditions. She explained to my mother that for some time, she's been feeling a presence and could not place its origin. My mom asked her to come inside to speak with me. She agreed, but upon stepping up to our door, she retreated. She said the origin was our apartment, and the spirit would not allow her to cross the threshold. At this point, my mom was hysterical, as most mothers would be if someone told them an evil being was possessing her in her daughter's home. Our neighbor apologized, but promised she would gather what she could to help us. In the meantime, my mom reached out to my grandmother. Not that wasn't already weird, but it got even weirder. My grandmother immediately told my mom to call my uncle. He had phoned my grandmother earlier in the day, asking about me, but didn't say as to why he was concerned, so my grandmother pretty much brushed it off. My mom called my uncle, and as soon as he answered the phone, he said, "I've been waiting on your call. We need to act now." It still gives me chills to talk about it.
We weren't close with this uncle at all and hadn't talked to him in years. He told us that an evil spirit had possessed our home and he was going to help us get rid of it. He sent us a bottle of oil that was supposedly poured upon where Jesus was laid to rest. I feel as if that bit was a crock of nonsense, but whatever, it made it sound pretty legit. He instructed us to bless all doorways and entryways. This meant every door, closet, and window. He gave us a prayer to repeat and told us to make the sign of the cross over each one. Our neighbor had also given us a dream catcher to place upon the bed frame the night we blessed the house. She made us swear to stay in our bedroom that night and not emerge until morning. My mom and I quickly blessed the house and both passed out of exhaustion. That night was the first night I had slept soundly since we moved in. My mom, however, laid awake the entire night. Whatever we did, pissed off the spirit. She said she held me tight and put her back toward the window as someone or something howled crying the entire night. It was terrifying screams, as if the realization had sunk in that we had shut the spirit out and it was no longer welcome. She said that night was the longest night of her life. To this day, I have no clue what I experienced. If my mom hadn't gone through it with me, I probably would have thought I was crazy. Seeing it laid out through text definitely makes it seem insane and completely unreal.